Hi, I'm Tom from Machine Studios, as I just said. Machine Studios make a game called Maya, which is a space colony game about, building a colony on another planet and then all your colonists die of hypothermia because you forgot to build enough heaters. It looks like that. Before I started writing games, I spent 5 years as a game journalist. Now, I was a little bit worried when I got asked to do this because, well, there's almost certainly people in this room who's got more experience at both those things than I do. Thankfully, I have a secret weapon. It's what kept me in ramen and rent payments when I was a freelance writer. It's strategy games. Now, I don't know how many of you actually make or play strategy games, but I found it's kind of a niche genre. Well, that's not really true at all. Like, lots of people play them, but not that relatively few write and talk about them. And since I'm currently writing a strategy game, and I used to review them all the time, I thought, here, I'm going to tell you about that. I hope you weren't expecting a generic talk on writing, by the way. So what I'm talking about here is how to write for an invisible skyguard. Because that's the problem, isn't it, with strategy games? For the most part, the protagonist is a floating, mute, omniscient, sometimes literal god. It's literal in those games that Peter Molyneux keeps making over and over again. You look at the world from a bird's eye view, and you're aware of pretty much everything, Fog of War notwithstanding, and you can magically control and direct all your minions, so long as you built up enough minds. I'm pretty sure that bit was in the Bible somewhere. All of which works fine when you're playing a simple sandbox game. But what happens when you want to tell a real story? How do you write dialogue for a god? I mean, other than including lots of these and nows. I really struggled. So there's basically 3 ways you can do this, and I'm going to tell you about each of them in turn. First one, I call Welcome Commander. I really struggled to decide which terrible Camp Red Alert celebrity I was going to use. It could just have easily have been George Takei, or Kane, obviously. Does anyone else prefer Red Alert to Command and Conquer? I think it's just sillier, and that works. Yes, well done everyone. Good taste, you. A more recent touchstone would be the XCOM games. Those last 2 slides don't actually look that different. In these games, the characters essentially speak directly to the fourth wall, addressing you as commander. Well, not always, but seemingly always. Not only is it's not really the same as a first-person view, at least not unless your character is spending the entire time standing stock still and staring straight ahead. Instead, it's addressed as if you, the player, are the commander. In Red Alert, they actually make this explicit. They talk as if they're talking into a video feed, and with occasional effects and stuff. It's the idea that I assume they're transmitting to you where you're, several miles away from the front line, sipping wine in your chalet, whilst everyone else gets fried with Tesla coils. So, what are the benefits of this approach? Well, it helps build up secondary characters, because they essentially have to carry the weight of the story. Any emotional or narrative arcs fall on them. Secondly, it offers a kind of quasi-explanation for why you have this omnipotent control, why you're an invisible sky god. Because again, you're on the video broadcast, you're sort of transmitting things to the soldiers. Thirdly, it attempts to forge a direct connection with the player. Speaking straight into the camera like that can be quite a powerful tool if you do it well, for both drama and, or in the case of Red Alert, for comedy. Well, the main negative is pretty obvious as well, which is that you don't really know who the protagonist is. They never say anything or express an emotion. Done well, this can come across as stoic, but done poorly, it can make you look so passive that you may as well be comatose. Nevertheless, it restricts the amount of stories you can tell. You're probably not going to have a story about how the commander always struggled to get their father's approval when it's just people talking to a screen. I actually added that last point, the last second before, and didn't include it in my notes here, which is that obviously if you're speaking directly to the fourth wall, it's completely gender-ambiguous and people can project whatever they want onto the character. So that's number 1. What's number 2? You're this guy. This is the direct opposite of having the protagonist sit behind the fourth wall. It's to put them in front of the camera and on the map. The most obvious example of this is StarCraft, in which the player explicitly plays as Cigar Man over there. Sorry, I can't remember his name. I keep forgetting it. Alternatively, if you're playing Heart of a Swarm, you're playing with Kerrigan's arse. I assume there's another person in Legacy of the Void, but honestly, who cares about the Protoss? An alternate example would be in Homeworld, where you play Karen's Jet. I hope I pronounced that right. It's one of those sci-fi apostrophe names. A middle-aged female scientist in 1999, very progressive, who essentially plugs herself into the mothership and commands the fleet from there. So you don't play as her there in the previous slide, you play as her there. That ship. Honestly, I mostly included this slide, even though a lot of people here won't remember Homeworld, because I really like how that game looks. Look at those pretty vapor trails, it's lovely. In these games, the protagonist is a unit on the map and can be used like any other. And it has its own pros and cons. Obviously, the protagonist is way more strongly defined and takes centre stage for all the action and is directly connected to all the other characters. The downside is it raises obvious questions like, what happens when the protagonist dies? Most of the time the answer is, game over, please start again. Which makes more sense in Homeworld than it does with Dear Bro in StarCraft, because the mothership is also your base that builds all your units. If it's destroyed, there's no real way you can recover. But it also raises other questions like, how can Big Large Huge over there see what's on the other side of the map? To which I usually reply, it's a video game. But some people care a little bit more about realism like that than I do. Now on to our third and final version, which I call Pay No Attention to the Man Behind the Curtain. The idea here is that we pretend the invisible sky dog does not exist. Characters talk about them like they aren't there, and imagine they have agency over their own lives, the poor deluded fools. Classic take on this would be The Sims, in which the Sims appear to be completely unaware of the malevolent force that is ruining their lives. Incidentally, if you've not seen the College Humor video, which reconfigures The Sims as a horror movie, you should, it's really funny. Again, if you look at the pros and cons, it's kind of the same as the Commander. Like, you avoid, the big thing here is that you avoid the invisible sky god question. No one asks, why are you controlling these people's lives? Because they don't know who you are. It also gives secondary characters a lot more agency when you're not omnipotently controlling what they do, which is why we tend to see this in games like The Sims, like Dwarf Fortress, where the little characters are running around by themselves and you can only sort of influence them one way or another. Ironically, Black and White was those. The cons, no protagonists at all. You literally don't speak of them, they may as well not exist. And similarly, by giving secondary players characters agency, you kind of take it away from the player a bit, because they kind of move on their own impulses and you're not necessarily in control in the same way. And eventually, people are still going to ask the question, who's doing all this? Who am I? So, yeah, I probably should have listed that as existential angst. So there we go. This is the end of the talk. There are only 3 ways to write a strategy game. You should pick one of them and in no way attempt to subvert the form. It's obviously not true. In fact, everything I've said up until now is kind of a lie, isn't it? I mean, because what I've done here is not describe the 3 hard rules of telling a story in a strategy game, but the 3 most common ways of doing so. In fact, I haven't even been entirely honest about that. Lots of these games blur the line between one method and another. Take XCOM, for example. I told you that it was a welcome commander thing where they just talk to the screen. But actually, in the first mission of XCOM 2, a squad breaks into an enemy facility and rescues you, the commander. So you are this guy. It does a little bit of both. So don't ever believe anyone who tells you there's only 3 ways of telling you a story. There's infinite ways of telling a story. We just haven't thought of them yet. And finally, there's no reason you at the back, couldn't invent an entirely new way of writing for strategy games. It isn't even that hard. You could just bring in some of the ideas we've had writing for other kinds of games in the past. Anyone who follows me on Twitter probably knows what's coming next. There we go. You can't see that very clearly. It turns out there's a Mass Effect dialogue wheel generator on the internet. It's not that good though. It's why you can't see it very well. Yes, I want to Mass Effect strategy games. Because why not? Either with either Welcome Commander or You Are This Guy, there's no reason why you can't choose a response to something someone just said. So why not try dialogue choice in strategy games? They put dialogue choice in FIFA this year. It turned out okay. Well, that's kind of what we're doing on Maya to an extent. For the most part, we've been writing the game as a combination of Welcome Commander and Pay No Attention, where other characters talk about you mostly as if you aren't there. But recently, and I mean really recently, as in we're releasing this as an update tomorrow, we've been playing with this colonist choice system. This is a very simple example. You probably can't read that at the back because I didn't make it big enough. But essentially, the colonists already in Maya will send you little emails telling you how they're doing, if they're hungry, if they think you should build a thing. And recently we added some little choices to this. So this guy, this isn't the best example, unfortunately, because this guy is just writing some short stories and wants to know if you want to hear any. And I had great fun writing a little procedural, terrible sci-fi generator for that. But in other cases, they will give you little dilemmas like, asking you to choose between setting some of your crops on fire or them dying of disease. Ideally, both answers should have both upsides and downsides. One of the key reasons we started doing this isn't actually narrative, it's mechanical. Kind of a problem in these sort of base building, dungeon keepery games where the AIs have this sort of autonomy that Maya, which is what Maya does, is that once you've got everything lined up, it kind of runs itself. They look after themselves, they do everything for them. So we wanted to make sure that people were always making some kind of interesting decision. So we started coming up with these, and the idea is that they will mail them to you every now and again. So if you've created the perfect base, they still might ask if they can set the chickens on fire. A lot of these are about setting things on fire. Don't blame me for that one, blame Simon. So there you go, that's it. I've never been very good at kind of wrapping up talks like this, but hopefully you know, if you didn't already, how strategy games are written, and hopefully you've got some ideas to change them. Or you could just play some other genre, I guess, but that just leaves more for me.
How did you get into the role of writing the strategy games?
As I said, I spent about 5 years in games journalism. A lot of games journalists will transfer into some kind of writing role in the end. I know, like, some of the guys from Rocket Shotgun have done it, and a few others as well. In this particular case, it was because I was just incredibly lucky in that outside of games journalism, I spent a couple of years working in the non-games tech sector. Did some testing and some equivalent to producing. And then I happened across a small indie company that kind of needed all three of those things in one person, which there aren't that many people who can do. So there was a little bit of luck, really. A lot of people will transfer from that, from criticism, partly because it burns people out.